The Admiralty has announced that there is no longer any justification for hope that any further lives can be saved from the submarine Thetis. The latest information is that salvage work is proceeding and that the submarine will either be towed to the nearest shore and beached or brought back to Birkenhead.
In the autumn of 1939, the rusting hulk of the Royal Navy's most modern submarine was raised from Liverpool Bay and beached on a shoreline in North Wales. "99 men had died inside, poisoned by carbon dioxide. Yet for hours, the boat was clear of the water. What had caused the accident, which is still the Navy's worst submarine disaster? What were the fatal errors which made it impossible to free the men? And why did the government suppress an official report which would have blamed the Navy for the deaths? It's summer 1938, and job number 1027 is about to become His Majesty's submarine Thetis, the most modern sub in the world and pride of the Royal Navy. She's a patrol boat, 275 feet long with 6 torpedoes. The first of the Trident-class submarines to be built at Camel Laird in Birkenhead.
Camel Laird, to me, was the world's greatest shipyard. It was my first launch, actually. Alongside the slipway, of course, it had the other submarines. And strangely enough, on that launching platform were 3 of the senior officers that were lost in the Thetis. You can picture the scene, hundreds of men bustling, pushing, trying to get into a certain position. I name this ship HMS Thetis, and may God bless her and all who sail in her. And a terrific crash. Then there'd be the explosion of the rockets in the River Mersey to warn all of the shipping to keep away from the area.
Thetis has taken 20 months to build and has cost £350,000. To the Admiralty, the boat is an important weapon, an investment for a future war. And conflict is in the air. The Navy is steadily building up the fleet in response to Nazi Germany. Few people believe peace will remain intact for long. Thetis's new crew proudly march in Birkenhead in a parade marking National Service Day. Within 6 weeks, all but 2 will be dead. On her very first outing, Thetis runs into problems. As she heads for Scotland for sea trials, the crew find the steering mechanism has been fitted the wrong way round. And she can't dive because of another mechanical failure. Unwillingly, she returns to Birkenhead. There are angry arguments about who's to blame and why the Admiralty inspectors who oversee construction have missed such glaring errors. The faults are investigated, and Thetis's life at Camel Laird's is nearly over. But as a final coat of paint is applied, another tiny detail is about to be overlooked. The consequences will prove catastrophic. On the final day of May 1939, the crew gathers for a party. Tomorrow, Thetis is leaving port again, a second attempt at diving trials. This time, it's closer to home, in Liverpool Bay. One of the crew skips the party. Petty Officer Cook Joseph Hughes, father of Margaret and husband of Doris.
I was a bit worried that he was in submarines, but there was nothing I could do about it. He loved it, and there was more money. And that's what we needed to establish a home. And we bought furniture so happily because we'd saved up for this, to make our home for the first time. And, oh, thrilled to bits. And it was a lovely, well, it wasn't a very lovely house, but to me it was the best. And he used to go out of a morning like an ordinary workman and come home at night because he was there for the building of the Thetis. They were going to have, I think, a party on the night before, you know, a sort of get-together with the lads sort of thing. But he didn't drink or anything, and he didn't go, which was I was grateful for. He was with me on the night before. But he went out that morning quite a happy boy, and I thought, well, you know, tonight I'll have his favourite meal and I'll have the hot water ready for him to have his bath, get Margaret to bed, and we'll have a lovely evening. But it wasn't to be. I didn't see him again after he went out.
A passenger on board an Isle of Man ferry takes the last picture of Thetis as she sails to a point 38 miles west of Liverpool and 15 miles northwest of Llandudno. It's a position newspaper editors will be keen to illustrate for their readers in the days ahead. On board, it's cramped. There are 103 men. Only 69 are sailors. The rest are mainly engineers from Laird's. It's twice the number she was built to carry. The captain reminds the civilians they can transfer to a tugboat before they start to dive. No one leaves. It's a bit of a gala occasion, a thank you and a chance to finally fix the teething problems. They all expect to be home for tea. One of the most experienced men aboard is stoker Walter Arnold, a sailor for 7 years, and now father of 1-year-old Derek.
He was a career Navy man. He was a good draftsman, a good engineer. He knew how the systems worked. He was a very popular person. He felt that at the time of the trials, the second trial in Liverpool Bay, when they were going out, there's been sufficient time for all the problems encountered the first time to have been ironed out, and he didn't anticipate any trouble whatsoever.
Neither does anyone else. As 2 o'clock approaches, the weather is warm and the sea calm. Thetis prepares to dive for the first time. But even with the equivalent weight of a double crew, she's been only semi-submerged for nearly an hour. She can't dive because she's too light. One way of adding weight is to allow water into the torpedo tubes. But could they be full already? Lieutenant Frederick Woods is the torpedo officer and has served in submarines now for 3 years. It's his job to determine if water is in the tubes or not. There's a procedure to follow. Torpedo tube doors have small test taps, which will release either air or water, depending on what's in the tube. To ensure nothing is blocking the test tap, a thin metal rod, or rimer, should be used to clear the pipe. But Lieutenant Woods doesn't use it. When he opens the tap, nothing comes out. He isn't to know that a few weeks earlier, a painter, working on the other side of the torpedo door, had allowed enamel to drip inside the test tap and solidify. Water can't get through because the pipe is blocked. Woods, though, now believes the tube is empty. In fact, it's full, and worse, the outer torpedo door, the one leading to the sea, is also open. For reasons which will never be explained, Lieutenant Woods decides to open the door inside the submarine. With hundreds of tons of water now filling the first and second compartments, Thetis nosedives. In the third compartment is stoker Arnold.
He knew something was wrong when he felt a blast of air go past him. Most unusual in a submarine, never happens in a submarine. As soon as he felt that blast of wind, he knew something was wrong because there was a lot of noise, a lot of banging, a lot of shouting.
The men try to close the watertight door between the first and second compartments, but it fastens with 18 clips and one of them jams. The submarine can stay afloat with one compartment flooded, but not 2. She goes down fast, hits the bottom, and embeds her nose in the mud. On the surface, those on board the escort tug, Greebcock, aren't sure what's happened. Thetis just disappeared. They know her radio will only work when she's on the surface. They have no answers. It's too deep to anchor, so they drift and wait. At Fort Blockhouse, the Navy's submarine headquarters in Portsmouth, everything is normal. Thetis isn't expected to surface for a couple of hours. The first message from Greebcock reaches a Liverpool shore station just before 5 o'clock. It's relayed onto London at 3 minutes past. It doesn't reach Portsmouth until nearly 20 to 6. There it sits for half an hour while a postboy fixes a puncture on his bicycle. The telegram arrives at Fort Blockhouse at 6:15. Thetis, carrying double its complement, has now been on the bottom of Liverpool Bay for 3¼ hours.
Even today, I picture, those 103 men being crowded into the submarine. They'd be on top of the engines, they'd be anywhere, all over the machinery, lying on the floorboards, lying on top of each other, scattered around that submarine. It'd be an appalling sight.
The man in charge at submarine headquarters is Captain I.A. McIntyre, and as soon as the Greebcock message reaches him, he declares Operation Subsmash. Ships are dispatched to aid Thetis. HMS Brazen is in the Irish Sea and gets the emergency message at 6:22. At that same moment, HMS Tedworth, the Navy's specialised diving ship, is in the Clyde. Not only is she hundreds of miles from the scene, she has little coal for her bunkers. She'll have to sail further north for more fuel and won't arrive in Liverpool Bay until it's too late. At 20 to 8, an RAF search plane takes off from Scotland. By 9 p.m, HMS Brazen meets up with the Greebcock, but she's now drifted from the last known position of Thetis. At 9:25, a marker buoy is spotted by the aircraft. The navigator radios the accurate position to Portsmouth. He's anxious. The men of Thetis are depending on rescue. He recalculates and gets a different fix. It's a disastrous mistake, for as he calls Portsmouth with the revised bearing, it puts Thetis 7 miles from her true location. Ships will now spend the night looking in the wrong area. Captain McIntyre, the man in charge of Subsmash, leaves Portsmouth at 10 p.m, not by plane or train or car, but on an aging destroyer. The man expected to make decisions on the rescue won't get to the scene for another 20 hours. On board Thetis, levels of carbon dioxide are becoming dangerously high. One attempt to escape through a hatch has already failed. It's now dark on the surface, and the men postpone further attempts. During the night, 60 tons of drinking water and fuel oil are dumped from Thetis, which now rises stern first. By daybreak, her rudder is out of the water, although her nose is still on the seabed. She's been submerged for 13 hours, and the Navy has failed to find her.
I think it took people time, literally, to get their brains around the problem. They'd never had nothing like this had ever happened to them before.
Inside Thetis, as the carbon dioxide replaces the oxygen, it takes one exhausted man more than 15 minutes to climb the steep angle to the control room. Time is running out for the 103 trapped men.
They were sleepy, basically. They just didn't have energy, they couldn't think straight. They were sitting there, they weren't making any conversation, they were not making any effort. They were just going down and down and down.
When he didn't come home, I just went to bed, quite happily. I thought, well, he's gone to his sister. I had no worries at all until the next morning when I came down the stairs and saw the Daily Express. And I thought, that's it, he's gone.
Others are also only now learning about the ongoing disaster through newspapers, like the brother of leading seaman Walter Luck.
If you can look up to a big brother, well, that's what I did. And when he joined submarines, I thought, well, there's only one person that's running the Navy now, and that was my big brother. I was down in Portland at the time on the Resolution. Somebody dropped down a newspaper. I think it was the Daily Mirror. And on the back of that was a photo of my mother and sister with a number of other relatives standing outside of Camel waiting for news. And that was the first I knew about it. I reported to my divisional officer, and I told him that I'd got a brother on board. I said then that I didn't want to go home straight away, because if I'd have gone home and he'd have got out, the first thing I know he would have said to me, well, what the heck do you want to come home for, upsetting everybody? So I just waited.
At Stoker Arnold's house, a telegram boy arrives. On board Thetis, now resting at an angle of 40 degrees, they've waited long enough. It's daylight on the surface, and they'll stand more chance of being picked up. Two men, Captain Joe Oram and Lieutenant Woods, go into the escape hatch. At the same moment, HMS Brazen spots the marker buoy, and within 10 minutes, Oram and Woods are safe. The full extent of their colleagues' precarious position is now all too clear to see. Captain Oram is suffering from carbon dioxide poisoning, but he's the only submariner on the surface. He advises ships to stay clear of Thetis's tail to prevent them overrunning escaping men. But inside the sub, men have already died. Realizing that lack of oxygen is now their greatest enemy, the crew try to get 4 men out of the escape chamber at the same time. 3 drown, and the last words of the 4th man are that the hatch is jammed. Stoker Arnold and Frank Shaw, a camel-laird engine fitter, now face the prospect of trying to get out of the same tube.
If you can imagine an escape chamber which is a little bigger than your average size wheelie bin, 1 man would be quite a load for it. 2 men would be quite crowded, but 4 men, there would be very, very little room to move. When he stepped in there, he felt that if it was jammed, he was a gunner. If it wasn't jammed, he was quite a strong bloke. He was 27, he was fit, he was tall, well built. He had the strength to be able to open a hatch if it was openable. And with a little bit of pushing and shoving with himself and Frank Shaw, they managed to move it. But once they'd started it moving, it went easily. And as soon as it opened, Frank Shaw went up first, followed quickly by my father.
One of the survivors reaches land. Mr. Shaw, an employee of Camel Laird. Enveloped in a lammy jacket and hood, he is driven away from the quayside. Mystified anxiety deepens as the hours roll by, and no new attempts to escape are made.
And then there was a silence on the radio, and my sister came round. She said, "They've got 4 off, Doris, but there's no more coming off, and they're going to give another announcement at midday, 12 o'clock. I said, "Oh, God." I said, "Of course, he told me about coming through the conning tower and all that, you know," and I thought, well, he told me all about that. He'll come out, and he's a good swimmer.
4 men have now escaped from the submarine. 99 are still entombed. A diver has been down to try to connect an airline, but the currents are too strong. Now a wire hawser is strung around the stricken submarine and held in place by a salvage ship. The plan is to keep the stern up in the rising tide. A wreckmaster, Charles Brock, starts to undo a hatch, but escaping air worries him and he tightens the bolts again. As the tide changes and starts to push against her, Thetis begins to heel. Brock leaps off the stern. Cutting equipment, ordered from Birkenhead 5 hours ago, now arrives, and another vessel carrying an electric drill joins the group. The wire hawser is tightened, and Thetis begins to rise. Without warning, the wire rope snaps. Slowly, almost gracefully, Thetis twists and starts to go down. 25 hours after making her maiden dive, Thetis is lost again. Before she touches bottom, 99 men will suffocate.
The Admiralty issued a statement early this morning saying that divers had reported hearing faint tappings in the submarine Thetis.
On the surface, no one knows the fate of the men in Thetis, and a new search gets underway. It's another 25 hours before the Admiralty gives up.
I was given 4 days leave and a railway ticket because I think I had about 2 and 9pence on me at the time. And I arrived home, as far as I can recall, about an hour after my mother received a telegram saying, "Give up hope."
All the men seemed to flock into the yard, and we had a workforce then leading up to 10,000 men. And I always remember marching up the Old Chester Road to the town hall. I remember standing on a flower bed, and I was with some of my colleagues. And at that time, we were thinking about forming the male voice choir, and all these colleagues seemed to get together by the town hall. And from nowhere came a Salvation Army band, and onto the balcony of the town hall came the Bishop of Chester, and a service was performed. And I always remember the emotion as the men walked back to the yard. You know, we were very overwhelmed with the tragedy that had happened to one of our submarines in the bay, and the people that were lying down there inside the submarine.
A memorial service at sea is held over the spot where Thetis went down. From the crew pictured a few weeks earlier, only 2 survived the sinking. Lieutenant Woods, the officer who ordered the opening of the torpedo tube door, and stoker Walter Arnold. The Navy withholds Arnold's wages because he can't produce his pay book, which is still inside Thetis. And the bodies of their comrades remain inside Thetis for another 5 months, until the submarine can be salvaged from the bottom of the bay. And by now, the country is at war. The public inquiry into the accident lasts 5 months. In the end, no individual is blamed. Camel Laird's is unsuccessfully sued, and the Navy has a global war to fight. Many believe more could have been done to save the men, but people's anger and frustration is quickly replaced by the need to survive themselves. Thetis is off the front page, for good. David Roberts is a Birkenhead-based historical author who'd been curious about the Thetis incident since boyhood. His research has thrown new light on the question of blame. In a new book, Roberts claims there was a high-level cover-up which ultimately prevented families suing for compensation.
The official public inquiry that was held after the loss of Thetis essentially blamed nobody. They blamed it on an unfortunate sequence of events, incredibly one of which was the failure of those aboard Thetis to escape. So not only did you have to die on Thetis, you had to take the blame as well. The country was now at war. The last thing that the Navy and the establishment needed was to diminish morale, as it were, and to make the Navy look like the buffoons that they were.
Extensive research at the Royal Navy Submarine Archives in Gosport revealed a document which, back in 1939, had been made secret for 30 years.
And I knew exactly what I was looking for, and I found it. And there it was, with confidential written all over it, typewritten, 22 pages long, and it was totally damning. It censured individuals. It blamed individuals, whereas the official inquiry blamed nobody. The internal Navy report, which was written before the official inquiry took place, actually censored naval officers and Admiralty personnel. So it pointed the finger. Here was culpability, here was responsibility, and it was never, ever, ever made public.
The Navy's own report blamed Lieutenant Woods, saying he wasn't justified in opening the tube doors. But then Roberts found a document signed by Winston Churchill, who as First Sea Lord was head of the Admiralty. Churchill said the war meant there was little interest in Thetis, and he didn't want Woods disciplined. And he asked the other Sea Lords if the official report should even be published. The Sea Lords replied saying, "It's up to Churchill."
In other words, Winston, there is an internal Navy report that blames people, and we have told you, You now know. So, when things go wrong, if the situation should explode, my backside is covered. Because I've told you, Winston, that you now know about it. You make the decision. And Churchill said, publish the clean one.
There is a difference between the tribunal report and the Internal Board of Inquiry, in as much as it does specifically allude to the opening of 5 Riddle, when in the opinion of the board, it was not a justified action at the time. Bearing in mind it's stamped confidential because there are references to submarine capability in there, and that's why it carried the security marking. If the issue is one of cover-up, all I can say is, in my opinion, it was not a cover-up. Very difficult to lay blame at any individual's feet, because of the number of contributory factors.
Lieutenant Woods remained in the Navy but never returned to submarines. He died in a car accident in 1947. He'd made a mistake, but so had many others. It was the end of Thetis, but not the submarine. There was one final twist of fate in store. It was refitted and relaunched as Thunderbolt in December 1940. On the 2nd of June 1943, the Admiralty announced that Thunderbolt had been depth-charged and lost with all hands in the Mediterranean. It was exactly 4 years to the day since Thetis had been lost in Liverpool Bay. She'd become the only submarine to sink twice. 61 years on, this extraordinary story still raises memories of bad luck, bad judgment, and bad timing. But finding someone to blame, or wondering about the lack of compensation, can't bring back the dead.
Well, what good would it do now? What good would it do now? I never had any compensation. I've got a wonderful daughter, a wonderful family, and I'm very happy about that. So God has repaid me with a family. But at the same time, I've had a very lonely life.
They say memories gradually fade, but when I stand by that grave, I do go back over 60 years and I remember. And I think of the waste, a big waste of life.
The tragedy of Thetis was so many different mistakes were made. So many bad moves were made, and so many decisions were not made.